Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Don't Worry Darling. This was directed by Olivia Wilde. This is Wilde's second feature-length film after Booksmart, and obviously there was a lot of gossip surrounding this movie when it initially came out, and when it comes to Miss Wilde, just as a person, I've noticed in interviews and such, she's somebody that likes to use a lot of words to say very little. Her main talking points tend to be either voting for a political candidate or smashing the patriarchy, and there's very little in between that. But she's also the type that I think victimizes herself unnecessarily, and she tends to blame the patriarchy when she is criticized. And, this is a lot of delusional behavior that we see that is commonplace in Hollywood. And in my opinion, I don't think that she handled it well, at least in the public. And instead, she kind of doubled down on that pseudo-feminism, which I just don't think is a very flattering look for her. But it is interesting to see just how much this film was bombarded by the press of it. But in the immediate moment, I think it both helps and hinders the film, because obviously you get a lot of attention on it for sure. It helps it in the sense that it also provides a really fascinating but concerning look into the mind of Olivia Wilde, I think. Very meta angle there. But at the same time, without all of that gossip surrounding it, there is just naturally a thinness to the film, just in terms of the experience of it. But I have to say, I do think that this film actually has some surprises that I was not expecting, and it does have some interesting layers to it. And I think in part the public disdain for Olivia Wilde kind of contributed to a lot of the hate that the film received, which I don't think is fair to her or the work. But ultimately, I do not think that this is a good film, but it does have potential. At least that's how I see it. It's just really stuck in this very superficial, delusional bubble, which keeps the film, I think, from growing and testing its own morals, and it keeps a lot of the stakes from being very interesting. It's the lack of stakes here for me that fail to create a true binding for the material. Because it's like, what is this film truly about? Of course, on the surface, we all know it's about crushing the patriarchy in a very merciless sort of way, and all of that. But yes, at the heart of it, I think this is more just a breakup movie. And that is the final layer, the final twist on things that truly creates the emotional resonance. And in a way, it's kind of borrowing a little bit from the Midsummer playbook. And to me, this is the crux of the emotion. And unfortunately, it is not explored very much at all in the ways that I wanted. And it's kind of shoved to just a very kind of brief section in the third act. I think most of us know the setup for this movie. We have Florence Pugh, and she is playing Alice, and her husband is Jack, played by Harry Styles, and they live in a 1950s Pleasantville sort of suburban community called Victory. And the ladies, of course, there breed, and they cook dinner, and they clean, and of course the boys go off to work every day from 9 to 5, and they work at some mysterious, vague company, and the ladies don't know exactly what they're doing, but they don't question anything as long as they bring home the bacon. And of course, we begin to see the illusion of Wonderland crack for Alice very early on in the movie, where she starts to realize something is off about this place. And it's one of those situations where, of course, nobody believes her. But all of this you get a good sense of, I think, in the trailer. There will be spoilers from here on out in this review, so I'm just going to warn you there. In the halfway part of the film, that's where the big twist starts to really reveal itself. And it is, of course, that this is kind of a simulation, very much like The Matrix, and Alice is basically waking up. Alice and Jack are actually a modern-day couple, and they are in this simulation, as I said, that is meant to look like a 1950s paradise, and it's a way to escape their marital frictions and perhaps their financial woes. And I have to give the movie credit, because I felt like I had it all figured out, but then when you add that extra emotional layer, it really changes your perceptions of how you view the rest of the movie. And so in that sense, it does help, I think, a little bit to give it a second viewing. Because while I have a lot of issues with the first half of the film, there is a sense of that skeletal quality actually working, of course, in the big scheme of things, once you see the whole thing with perspective. The first half is very swanky with the needle drop soundtrack, and you have a lot of colors that are really popping, and that artificiality is, I think, really working. And the fashion and the decor, it is easy, I think, to say that it is very self-indulgent on the part of Olivia Wilde, and to a degree it absolutely is, but there's also some irony there as well. But the problem with this first half is that it just does not engage you in the ways that it needs to. You have a lot of kind of key moments, some red flags, some breadcrumbs that are warning us of the inevitable danger. But rather than using a lot of those early scenes to give us an intriguing setup through the characters, through their relationships, and through their own personal motivations, it just feels like shells. It feels like empty, cliche cinematic devices that have been done better in other films. And that's also part of the problem, is that Olivia Wilde, it seems like she told her cinematographer, do it this way because Jordan Peele did it and he was very successful, or do it this way because Martin Scorsese is one of the greatest film directors of all time. It feels like she is very conscious of these big shoes that she has to fill. And there is just this self-importance to it that I really could have done without. It's very much milking the look at me, I'm a big director now sort of thing. And this is a proper expensive movie, very much a cinematic experience. And a lot of the visuals are actually really compelling at certain times. But I do think the film could have benefited from honing in a little bit more on the intimacy, especially building those relationships, as I said. You know, like there's a very spacey character in the first half of the film named Margaret, and she does feel very much like a third-rate device that is from Get Out. She's wearing a white gown and she's whispering that terrible things are about to happen, and of course people just dismiss her. But that whole metaphor is just so cliche, so empty, and you just don't feel what's happening on screen because of how cookie cutter it is. And Alice, you know, she claims that Margaret was her friend, but it's like we never saw any of that. It would have been nice to have maybe a scene or two where you build a little bit about that so we have some curiosity about Margaret. And I think that the relationship between Alice and Jack is so important to build from the ground up in a very, very careful way so that we can see the yin to the yang much later on. I just think there needs to be kind of an interesting foundation where we can see a little bit, you know, just the cracks in the facade, just little by little, but we don't have a lot to go off with these two, and therefore, you know, I struggle to root for them. And yes, they are meant to be cookie cutter. That's the whole point. All these characters are meant to be like these cardboard stereotypes, but I think you can intrigue us forward with that cookie cutterness. You know, think David Lynch. He's very good at doing stuff like that. And yeah, you know, it takes a great director, I think, who has a real understanding of nuance for that sort of thing. And unfortunately, a lot of this feels like, you know, Art House 101, especially with like the eggs cracking and the window kind of smushing Florence Pugh. A lot of the sound effects in the soundtrack here just feel really on the nose. And a lot of those cliches keep us from building that complexity. Especially as an example, who is Alice? I think that's an important question, and something I don't think is really answered here, because we need her to resonate with us. Her story needs to resonate with us. I want a sense of who she is in this world and the identity that she has, and so it can translate into, you know, the slow reveal of reality. And I think it might have been nice to, you know, show a little bit more of her spunk and a little bit more of her individuality very early on in the film so that it pays off more in the second half. I just think that the first half, just all of it, should have been majorly shortened. And a lot of the more juicy stuff that starts to get planted, I think, could be shoved a little bit more to the front. As an example, you know, when Jack is asking Alice if she wants to have a baby, that's really great. Just something like that plants a little seed. She has this in her head. We get a sense of who she is. Does she want the baby? Does she not want the baby? And maybe this could trigger a little bit of a glitch in the matrix. And it will give a lot of these surreal splits that we see from her point of view a lot more density, I think. And also the main problem overall is I think we need to have a good sense of what we are losing and what we are gaining. Like I said, stakes are, you know, such a huge part of a story, but especially in this one, what is so bad about the Victory community? Now, this becomes a more complex question as the film goes on, but initially, I'm sure a lot of people ask that question because at the beginning of the film, Alice seems very happy, very content. She doesn't seem like somebody who stands out or somebody that, you know, is going to question the narrative. So I'm trying to understand it because, you know, for some people, there is nothing wrong with being a housewife in the suburbs, and it's not some horrific fate where women are considered prisoners. Some find contentment in traditional lifestyles, and some really struggle with it. And I think I want to see more of that difficulty for Alice. And I wanted more of the Olivia Wilde character here because she's the one character besides Florence, who is, you know, aware of what Victory is, and she knows exactly what she's doing. You know, she knows that she is living in a fantasy world and she chooses to be there. And that is another thing that I think is really interesting to probe, and I wish they had focused a lot more on that, because it's like in The Matrix, when Neo wakes up and he sees what the real world is like, it's like, this sucks, I want to go right back in. Of course he does. But all of that in that particular film is explored, and it pays off in such satisfying ways. And I think my favorite part of Don't Worry Darling, or one of them, is when Jack asks Alice, you know, why would you want to leave this place? It's like, you're happy here. Aren't you happy here? But that's not the point. This is not about whether she's happy or not in this place. It's about her, you know, taking back her autonomy. It's about her finding the freedom to make her own choices. Maybe she'll make good choices, maybe she'll make bad choices, but the point is that she has the ability to do so. And I just think it's a really interesting idea to probe somebody who wants to stay there and just decides to turn a blind eye to things compared to somebody who chooses to take the long, hard road of reality. And I just wanted a lot more of that. One of the things I really struggle with is just that it's hard to take a film seriously that is so like viciously opposed to men, and it is so one-sided, because this film is constantly shoving down our throat how bad the patriarchy is and just how oppressed we women are because of it. But it is so off-putting. Just relegating all men to just the villain, I think, is just getting so old, and it is really, really condescending and offensive. It's so cartoonish at times that you really do struggle to see any defined stakes, especially when Olivia seems to consider men that are in their late 20s who just, I don't know, listen to Joe Rogan podcasts to be like the evil in the world that needs to be dismantled. She sees all men as just these controlling, whiny babies, and you start to see that it physically manifests itself as the film goes on. And it's just nauseating, because not all women are perfect, not all women are victims. That's a huge question she needs to ask herself, is like, why do you think that the patriarchy is so oppressive at present? That would have given a lot of density to this whole project. Because is it the patriarchy that you're really angry with, or is it more yourself? And maybe it's because we know too much about Olivia Wilde and we know too much about the behind the scenes stuff of this whole thing, but I just feel like morally, this film is lost in a very delusional philosophy, and it makes it hard to stomach at times, but it's also a very fascinating experience at the same time, just because of how it reveals itself, whether it's aware of it or not. We have a director here who thinks that she deserves the same sort of clout and the same accolades as the people who came before her, rather than just holding her head high and starting to find her own voice and working hard and, yeah, finding her own success. I don't think she's untalented, and when you see the entire film, I do think that some of her instincts are maybe not as tone deaf as they initially seem. Even when it comes to Harry Styles, I know a lot of people really hate him and just his acting in the film, but I actually think he really, really works. Again, if you understand what she's trying to do, especially once you've seen the whole film, because she's wanting to make this character very much a whiny little bitch, and all he can do is really just kind of spaz out and cry. Because at first, yeah, he seems, very sweet, and he feels, he's boyish and he's charming, and he's kind of awkward at times, and that slowly shifts, and I think all of that was kind of cool. And she definitely has ambition and aesthetic, but it all feels very external and very hollow. And again, I think she really needs to ask herself the tough questions in order for her movies to be more interesting. But yeah, I am going to recommend this film, even though I have so many issues with it. I do think it is fascinating. Yes, it is more fascinating than it is entertaining, but I think there are some interesting discussions to be had about it. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below, and if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons, who are wonderful. Guys, thank you so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.